Hi folks, Paul here from 48 Spokes. Glad you could join me. Just about to start the final build and video recording of the second near side rear Rotoflex hub. So this is the final build and hence the final part of this mini series. So stay tuned and hope you enjoy. So let's get cracking and build this last hub up, shall we? Almost forgot that piece. Anyway, right, that's the starting point, and we'll start building the hub. So the most important thing to remember, and I almost forgot on the last one, was the back plate. So the back plate is the first thing that has to go onto here. And you've got to make sure that you get the back plate the right way up, and that's with the adjuster at the bottom. So that's where the adjuster goes. You can see those holes there. Adjuster goes there. The wheel cylinder goes there. So that goes to the top. Always a bit of a giveaway. There's a little bracket there that's welded onto the back plate, and that's where the hook goes for the spring that goes onto the cylinder. The cylinder, I can't remember exactly with. Oh, there's a little bracket that pivots on the cylinder for the handbrake. That's right. So that is for the handbrake, and that's always at the top. So the thing when you're building it, always make sure, especially after you've painted things, that things go together properly, even if you've painted and powder coated things. So you've got to do a little bit of fitting sometimes, and that's what I'm doing here, to make sure the back plate is properly down onto the vertical link. So next is the little bolts which hold the back plate on, and the back plate lock tab washers. Now you can see it's very flat, so what I tend to do is I get some pliers and I'll just bend the tabs very slightly just to get them started when you come to bend them up and lock them in position. So there's two of those to do. So now you can see that when they sit down, you've already got a start. You've got a head start on leaving them up. So they go onto the back plate. Next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to clean the threads up on the 4 bolts that secure the back plate in position. And the reason I'm doing that, I'm going to clean it with some acetone and some clean cloth to make sure that when I put the thread lock on, the thread lock works properly. See the dirt coming off. Right, what I'm going to do, I'm going to move this to the vise because I need to hold it quite rigidly while I torque it up. So I'm going to clamp it in a vise. I'm going to clamp it across there. It's very solid, and if you've got a good vise, it will hold it firm enough for you to be able to build it as in that position. So put a bit of thread lock on these. Right, according to the Visual Workshop manual, which shows all of the torque tightening settings for the different bolts on the car. So quick reference to this as I'm building it up. So the one that I need is the back plate to hub, and they are 5/16 UNF at 0.82 of an inch bolt. Yes, that's correct, and it's 14 to 16 foot-pounds. So use my small torque wrench to set that. So it's 15, 16 foot-pounds. Okay. Right, that's that. Now I need to knock these tabs over. So hammer and something to knock them over with, and I'm going to put it back on the bench to do that. What I tend to do both tabs, belt and braces. If I ever did need to replace these again, I'd put new little tab washers on. There, that's that done. So next we need to start and fit the bearings to the rotating hub, which we need the rotating hub. Now, if you can remember in our previous video, we used this to pull the bearing on. So but this time round, because this is the final build where we're putting the oil seals on, sorry, the grease seals, and we're packing the new bearings with grease, then we mustn't forget to put the grease seal on there, which is the first thing we need to do. So managed to get some new old parts from Mick Dolphin, so yeah, thank you Mick for these. And what we need to do, we need to make sure that the oil seal is the correct way around. So there's two sides to the oil seal. That side there, which is the open side, and you can just see the spring in there. That's the spring that forces the rubber here against the rotating seal and keeps the grease in. So what we need to do is we need to push the shaft through that way, so it has to go that way onto the shaft like that, and so the open part there is where the grease will be. So using some high performance bearing grease as per recommended. Just going to put a little thin smear around that diameter there, just for the grease, for the seal to sit on. You shouldn't never put these on dry. And we'll just press into position. So that's that on. Okay. Morning. Right, back to the Rotoflex. So, what did I do yesterday? Yesterday I made another wooden spreader piece for the 12mm bolt, which passes through the hub like that, and that's going to sit in the vise, clamping across the bolt. So the next thing to do, put this in the vise. Right, yesterday, if you remember, I fitted the oil seal, which is on there. The next thing to do is to fit the outer bearing race. So I've cleaned my bearings, washed all my bearings out with smooth peanut butter. I always use whole earth smooth peanut butter. It's by far the best for cleaning wheel bearings out. But no, seriously, it's got paraffin in. These containers are brilliant. I save them all the time. We get through a lot of peanut butter. But anyway, we save these containers, make a brilliant little impromptu cleaning pot for paraffin. So all the bearings have been properly washed, and you can see that's how clean the paraffin is. Now it's had the last bearing wash. So the next thing to do is to blow them out with the airline and pack them with grease. The grease I'm using is high performance bearing grease from Comma, and what I'm going to do, get like a golf ball size of grease on the palm of my hand, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to scrape the bearing through the grease and slowly build up the grease inside the bearing. You can see how it's packing. So you keep working your way slowly around the bearing. Until it starts to come out of the sides there. And then once you've worked your way around the bearing and it's all nicely packed on the back, flip it over and do the same from the other side. So I don't overpack it at this stage because I'm going to install it now onto the shaft, and I'll just check that it's covered before I do the final insertion into the other part of the bearing. Might as well pack the other one while I'm at it. So, as before in the previous video, I'm using my little piece of tooling, which was the old inner race, and what I'll be doing, I'll be pushing down directly on that surface there, which is the end, so I get it right, I'll be pushing down on that surface there, which is the highest point on the bearing, so I'm not touching the cage or the rollers or anything. You're pushing down the inner race basically, and the rest of the bearing will just follow it. And the reason why I put a split in it is because it's an interference fit on the shaft, and with having a little split in it, it relieves that, so you can just put a little screwdriver into the slot, twist it and pull it off if you need to. Again, using my caliper piston with a hole in that I made to start the process off. Nut and washer. And my 9.5 inch wrench. So again, you don't want to put too much force on these when you're putting them on. Shouldn't be a problem this time, it's already been fitted, but never ever use big bars on tooling. If you feel like you've got to use a bar, there's something else wrong, so don't use a big bar. So So this tool has been kicking on the garage floor while I've been fitting the rear suspension, so just quick inspection, make sure there's no dust, give it a quick wipe down with a cloth. You don't want anything falling off onto the new bearing. Remember, get ready for when it bottoms out. So it's going to go tight any minute now. Yeah, that's tight. Back it off. The reason it's gone tight is that face there has hit the end. You can just see the mark on it there. It's hit the end of the shaft. So now I've got to turn it round that way so that it can carry on and push it on a bit more. Right, had to do a bit of adjustment there. What I've done is I've used that face of the caliper piston, the one that's on there, because it is pretty much the same size as the inner race of the bearing. So I've used that just to push it down a little bit, only a couple of millimetres, just so I can get the thread to come through with the old inner race on. And so now I'm going to continue and put it on with the as I was before. Now you can see that's the inner race that I've used to push the new inner race on, and it's nicely in position with the oil seal. So that just pulls straight off, and I can use that another day. So inner bearings on now with the oil seal. What I'm going to do now, just a quick inspection to make sure there's no dirt or grit or fluff or anything that's got onto the bearing while I've been doing that. Then I'm going to put a little bit more grease on it. I'm going to put some grease on the outer race as I assemble it. This has been sitting on the bench for a while now, so I'm just going to go over to the airline and just quickly blow it out just to make sure there's nothing on it. Okay, right, so that's all cleaned out. You don't want to overpack your bearings, but you want to make sure there's enough grease in there, because that's it, once the grease is in there, that's all the lubrication they're going to get, and they've got to do quite a lot of work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bit of grease in here just before I assemble it. So that's all the grease that I put in, and I've just wiped around this diameter here, because that's the diameter there where the grease seal is going to sit, and that has to be levered in after it's built, because it will only go in part way while you're assembling it. So got a little bit of lubrication on there, so it just helped the seal to sit in. So what we've got to do now is try and persuade the seal to go in a little bit more than it actually is. So what I tend to use is a socket in that little pocket there and just tap it just to get the seal to sit into position. What you find, if you can see it, what you find is the seal is not completely sitting flush with the end face of the vertical link, which is where I really want it to be. So we can lever that in position once we're finished doing the build. If I try and lever it in position now, it just tries to lift the hub off. So with it in this position on the bench, what we need to do now is to put the inner bearing race into position. So one previously packed bearing, and I've put some grease in there. Just going to put a little bit more in, just onto the outer race and around the shaft. That should do it. One last check of the bearing, and on it goes. It should just tap into position. There you go. Tiny little tap and it's gone down. It's going to make sure the end of the stub shaft is free from grease, because that's where the shims and the distance piece are going to fit. So we've got our shims and distance piece. We're finished with this now, so we need to put the other end of the shaft in the vise. So next part of the process is to put your Rotoflex on to your half shaft and make sure it goes on in this attitude first. So and bolt and torque tighten those up, which I've already done. So now I'm going to put this into the vise. I'm going to protect these edges because that flange there is being powder coated, so I'm going to protect that with the soft jaws. Two more pieces. The dust shield, so I've had this one zinc plated, so that's all good to go, and I've made sure that the piece that carries the inner seal, so the inner seal runs on here, I've made sure that's nice and clean and free of any burrs, etc., because it's going to pass through the grease seal there, that way, in that direction, up that chamfer, so you want to make sure it's burr free. Dust shield goes on next. What I've done, I've just made sure there's no little burrs around here, because it was powder coated up to a hard edge, so it just feels a little tiny bit rough around there, but it's underneath that edge of that face, so it's not going to hold anything off. So next thing to go on, the dust shield, followed by the inner grease seal bearing. I'm going to call it a bearing because it runs on it, so inner grease seal bearing. Right, next to go on, I'm going to put the shims onto the shaft. So I'm going to put the distance piece on first, followed by the shims. So they're on. Right, next we're going to lower, we're going to invert this and lower it onto the shaft. You need to line up the splines. That's it, and then it drops on. So you can see here just how much thread is sticking through. not a lot at all. That's the nut that I'm going to be pulling it down with, and what I need to have is at least a full thread location on that nut, and there certainly won't be enough on there. It won't even start to go on. So if I was to tighten that up now, it would just strip the threads off. So full thread location before you start to tighten it up, very important. Right, so we're back on the bench now. The best way to do this without a shadow of a doubt is you've got a press tool will be to press this hub down across the splines, over the splines of the shaft, and that is by far the best way to do it. But I don't have a press, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just tap it on sympathetically with a socket which locates nicely in there. So I'm going to be hitting directly on the shaft, so I'm actually tapping the shaft directly onto the splines. So the bearings are all in there. I'm not tapping on the end of the bearings, I'm tapping on the end of the spline shaft in order to tease the splines of the outer part of the hub onto the shaft. So already I've got a little bit more thread on there, just a couple of taps, so we'll keep going. Yep, we're getting there. Yeah, a little bit more. We've almost got full thread on there. But what I want to be able to put the washer on as well. Found the washers. The thin washer is the one I'm going to use next, because it will allow me to put more thread, the nut to engage more on the thread. That thicker washer is the one that you end up fitting to the final shaft when you do the torque tightening in the end. That's the genuine article. This is just like a piece of tooling. You can see it's a lot thinner than that one. And you can see this nut screws on quite nicely now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put it back in the vise and continue to tighten it up. Again, be sympathetic. If it feels tight or overly tight, then there's probably something wrong and you should stop, because the last thing you want to do is strip the threads. Yeah, I can feel that going on now. Keep checking and spinning the bearings as you tighten it up. Error. Forgot the rear seal. So you can see things don't always go to plan for me. And this is why you need to understand all your tooling beforehand. So what I've done, forgot to put the rear seal on. Classic error. And what I need to do, just use my three-legged puller, pull it back off again, put the seal on, and then refit it. So that's life. Just glad I didn't go all the way down. Oh well. So, for those that spotted my deliberate mistake, there's a second grease seal to go in. So, there we go. Again, another genuine part from Mick Dolphin, and very nice it is too. So, the spring, you can see the spring in the back there. So the spring is what is going to be facing the internals where the grease is. So that's the way we're going to put it in. So this just fits into this diameter in here. There's just a little tiny bit of grease on there. So let's get that off so there's not too much. And this will simply tap into place. So what I did, I made a little piece of tooling, little piece of wood that's going to fit over the end of the grease seal, so it taps. So when I tap it, I'll be tapping it square, and I'll be tapping it in next. Again, listen for the sound to change. When it's hard down, it will make a different sound. And that's what it looks like when it's in position. So the distance piece and the shims are back on the shaft, and now what I'm going to do is going to flip this over. Now the grease seal is in place, and continue to fit it. So just line up the shaft with the splines. Just make sure there's no bits of dirt anywhere on it. So line the shaft up, it slides onto the splines, and we're good to go. So what we're going to do, get the socket that fits in there, and we'll tap it back on again. There, tapped it down. There's a full form location on there now, and we're ready to put it back in the vise now and start to tighten it up. Make sure it's nice and straight. Make sure it's nice and straight. You've got a good location on those flanges, and we can start to tighten it up now. Keep spinning it. Still got plenty of end float. So, gear puller. Just use the gear puller to pull. Just use the gear puller to pull the hub off a little bit. It just felt a little bit too tight. So I'm going to do the final check of the end float with it on the car. So I'm going to finish doing the build today, because I need to get the wheels, all the wheels on the car. This is the last one to be done. So I mentioned the oil seal earlier, the outer oil seal, and what I've done is, with it in position, it was sticking very proud at the end of the hub, the end of the vertical link. So what I've done, I've got a chisel. It's a rather old and very blunt chisel, round. It's not very any good for wood, but it's good for levering things. So what I've done, I've simply put it between the end of the vertical link and the hub, and I've just gone round the hub, just rotated it around like that, and just gradually just levered the end of the oil seal, and it just squeezes it into position. So that's a good little tip that I think it was Tony Lindsay Dean told me that one. So yeah, thanks again for that, Tony. That was a good one. Right, I'll carry on. So I'm literally just gonna nip this up. Right, there's a little bit of unfolk left in that, so I'm going to leave it like that and finish the build. What I'm going to do, I'm going to clean all the threads and the threads on the bolts, which have all been re-zinc plated, and clean it with acetone, and then I'll put it in the vise and build it up. And finally, get a bar to brace the drive shaft with. Wrap it in something so you don't damage the paint or the powder coat. Put it in position, and I'm using a block of wood for it to lever against on the bench. Get the torque wrench set to 65 to 70 foot-pounds, and finally torque them up. That's all there is to it.